I found a different kind of being in tune, and it wasn't the same as kind of being in tune with rereading my writing. It was a different process. It was very immersive, but it also was like I was attuning to very different things.
This is Daring to Tell bonus audiobook episode, the podcast where writers read their true stories of personal daring, then we talk about writing and life. I am your host, Michelle Rado.
Nothing's gonna make me brave, and nothing's gonna make me brave. Nothing's gonna make me brave except doing what makes me scared.
June is audiobook month. Who knew? Well, I do now that I've been producing them and helping the writers that I work with to promote their labors of love. And so while we did not plan for this alignment, it is all the more appropriate that this month Melanie Brooks and I announced the release of the audiobook of her memoir, A Hard Silence. One daughter remaps family, grief, and faith when HIV/AIDS changes it all. Now available pretty much anywhere you find your audiobooks. In this bonus episode, I'm going to share some of my favorite clips from the book, which will be sneak previews you cannot hear anywhere else. We also will talk about the making of the book and how this additional step of audiobook production, of reading your story, after the whole process of writing, editing, publishing, and promoting your book has its own additional layer in the process of understanding our stories. Before we jump in, though, I also wanted to share something that I found when I was looking through AudioFile magazine's website. And if you don't know AudioFile and you love audiobooks, I would definitely recommend checking them out, as they are the go-to for audiobook reviews and recommendations. And I was looking for writers who had read their own audiobooks, who were discussing their experience of doing so. And I came across an interview they had done with Sebastian Junger, the author of many books of nonfiction, including The Perfect Storm and War and Tribe. And I was absolutely riveted by what he said when he was talking about narrating his book, War. I was amazed at how hard it was to do the recording, he says, of the 2.5 days in the studio. It's not the kind of thing you think about. It never occurred to me how difficult it is to read a book. I mean, it's actually difficult. To read smoothly and with feeling and without thought. If you concentrate too much on doing that, you can't do it. And if you completely space out, you can't do it. So you need this weird kind of limbo where you're thinking about it, but not entirely thinking about it. A weird kind of limbo. That's it. And I think Melanie would probably agree as you hear her describe the time that she spent here with me to read her memoir, A Hard Silence. So please, let's get started with Melanie Brooks.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and thanks for all the work that you put into this. I'm so excited to be talking about it. I'm excited to be here again. I love being on your podcast, so great.
Yay! This podcast loves you too. It is just, we always have a great conversation, and so I am really excited to have you back. And yeah, we spent a lot of time on this book.
We did.
And the thing that's most special, I would say, about A Hard Silence is that you recorded it here in my quote-unquote studio, which you knew was where I also happen to store all my clothes.
Yeah, should we tell the audience?
Sure.
I was kind of the first foray that Michelle had into doing a recording, in person. And so she rigged up a really awesome little recording studio in a closet adjacent to her studio.
Yeah.
And, we managed to do really well.
I know. So the minimal soundproofing was good in that I didn't have talk back and I would just yell to you.
Yep,
And then I also had my long spoon that I could tap on the wall for you.
exactly, exactly. Yep.
I will say I take great pride in being somewhat scrappy in how we get stuff done because you don't
But I
have to
mean,
have like, yeah,
as listeners will hear, the end result is amazing, and
yeah.
being able to kind of do it in that setting as well. I mean, you had me at your home for weekends, and we had a
Hmm.
great time just
Yeah.
being there, and so it was a really terrific experience all
Oh,
around.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad to hear that from you because it was for me and it was really fun and it was, yeah, it
Yeah,
was just very successful
right,
on pretty much
right.
every possible level. So I thought I would start just by asking you in general, when did you know you wanted to have your own audiobook, but also record your own audiobook?
I think I knew that right away, and I was working with a publisher that doesn't do the audio version, so all of the audio rights belong to me. So I knew it wasn't going to happen right away. It wasn't going to come out at the same time as the book came out. But I did know that I wanted to have it within a year of the book being published. And I also knew that I wanted to narrate it. I felt pretty comfortable with my reading style. Also, I love listening to audiobooks, especially memoir that are narrated by the author. And so much of the story that I'm telling in the pages of A Hard Silence is so personal and so intimate for me that I think it would be difficult for me to hear somebody reading, in first person, reading that material.
Yeah. I cannot agree more, and I'm right
Yeah,
there with you, which is why when you had asked me about it and I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." So we met for lunch one day and talked about it and decided if like we both felt like it would be a good match, which we
right.
both felt pretty comfortable about that right off the bat. So that was also really good. From that point, what did you do to start preparing?
I think, the biggest part for me was just recognizing that it was going to be a lot of work, knowing that, we had some days where we recorded, 8 hours straight, right? Like we did a couple of days where it was pretty intensive.
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
I mean, not without
I
breaks,
was
but
gonna say, yeah,
yeah,
we
there
took
was some
little
breaks in
breaks,
there,
but
but, like,
yeah,
we spent, like, whole
yeah.
days, working on this, and I think I knew that that was gonna be intensive. I think I had to go back and, reread material that I hadn't been reading during the book tour to just remind myself what might be the difficult parts to be reading aloud and that kind of stuff, but I felt very confident going in. And I think part of that had to do with the fact that you and I are friends. And I feel like you have followed my process all the way through. So you really understand this book. You understand what it means to me. You understand how I want to present it.
Mhm,
And I think that that felt like a really important piece to the puzzle of just, I really trusted you
mhm, that's
and your
nice.
ability to help me through that process too.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, that means a lot to me, and, I take great seriousness in holding your book in sort of, midwifing your book or something like that, which is how it feels to me because it is such a very intimate and beautiful story. So and story, is that the right word? I mean, it's a
It is. I
story.
mean, it
Yeah,
is. Yeah, it is a story, and I think, but it's a very like you said, it's an intimate, it's a personal story. It's a very, deep part of my life, and I think in the same way that, when you're looking for a publisher for your book,
right.
you want somebody who's going to take care of it and take care of that story. And I
Yeah.
found that in my publisher and at Vine Leaves Press, and and I felt that same way about the audiobook. Like I want somebody who's going to take care of this book and take care of me in the process,
Mhm.
because it's a very different thing to go through and read it aloud, so
Right,
yeah.
exactly. So, did you start reading it out loud, like, once we kind of agreed, "Yeah, we're gonna do this"? Did you do a lot of prep at home in that way, or how
I
did
didn't do a ton just because I was already doing so many events where I was out and reading, and I didn't always read the same thing when I was on book tour and doing events. So I felt pretty comfortable in the sense of, when you spend 10 years with a book, you know the material pretty well.
Right.
You're pretty close to it. It wasn't like anything was going to surprise me as I read it. So I didn't feel like I had to do a lot of prep in that respect. And
Mhm.
I'm pretty comfortable with reading aloud. So, and I credit my grade 5 teacher, Mrs. McPherson, who,
Uh-huh.
who used to make us read aloud in
Right.
class. That was my
Yeah.
favorite thing to do. I know
Right.
these days that wouldn't be something that would be comfortable for every child, but
Right.
I loved doing that, and I credit her with, helping
Yeah.
me be a better oral reader.
Right, right. And believe me, I really understand. Like, you've spent so much time with the text, you are really, really familiar with it. So then, you got here. Actually, I remember the day you arrived, it was snowing out. And so,
Yep,
which actually, snow is a wonderful dampener of sound,
exactly.
so it was sort of a nice little,
Well, it kinda made it like a whole little cozy experience,
exactly.
like
Yeah.
it just we could be comfortable, it was snowing outside, it
Yeah.
was drank a lot of lemon
Yeah,
tea.
I know. I know. A lot of tea.
Use all your honey.
It's funny,
Yeah,
Melanie enjoyed a lot of honey while she was here, which was absolutely fine, and you brought
yeah.
me some in return when you were done, and I just had some of that honey on my yogurt and fruit for lunch today, and I
Oh,
think
that's
of you
nice.
every time I open it up. It's very
Yeah,
sweet. So, before even like, getting to this prep thing and familiarity with your own words, which
mhm,
obviously you have, were there moments as you were reading that sort of hit you saying, "Oh, I forgot about this part," or "I haven't read this in a while," because you were doing the whole thing
right. There
beginning to
weren't
end.
so many it wasn't so much like I'd forgotten about it, but, I mean, this is gonna sound strange, but there were moments when I would read something and I would kind of be like, wow, that's a really good sentence,
Isn't that lovely?
and kind of forget, like,
Yeah.
the amount of work I put into kind of the crafting of
Yeah.
each sentence, and, so sometimes, like, those sentences would kind of hit me, and I would kind of have those moments of, like, "Who wrote that? That was fantastic." And then
That is just the most
yeah,
validating moment to
right,
have. I
right.
mean,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly,
yeah.
like, Wow, that was pretty darn good."
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, which is a good kind of lesson for in the process of writing to
Mhm.
definitely be reading your work aloud to hear what it sounds
Yeah.
like, you
So
know?
you did that as you were
I did,
writing, you
I did
read
a
over.
lot of that,
Yeah,
yeah, I did a lot of reading it
yeah,
aloud,
yeah.
so
And I will say that I feel like some, I don't know about some books. Most books are written for the eye because they're
right.
usually a book that you hold and you read. And one thing, you have some very long sentences.
Yes, I do. I do, yeah.
So I think managing that for the ear and even for you
Right,
as you read, like, you are quite facile. I mean, I was very, very impressed that you were so solid with all your reading. I mean,
thank
did
you.
you have retakes? Of course you did, but what struck me really as we were, and I haven't said this to you before, but you did, I mean, obviously you did know your material inside and
Right,
out, but it was like
yeah.
you had done it 1,000 times. I mean, it was very solid.
Well, I will say that something about, kind of being in that little closet all by myself,
Yeah.
like it made, I mean, I knew you were on the other side of the wall, but there was something about like just being with my story, so
Mm,
it felt like a very immersive experience
right.
for me too. So I was kind of really in it as I was reading it. I
Yeah.
didn't feel disconnected from it in any way. And I think that helped. I think I just kind of the rhythm of the story kind of took over as I was reading it,
Yeah.
and I was right in it.
Wow. Well, it definitely shows. I mean, I think it definitely comes across in the final product, but it came across even in the raw take, as I
Right.
would call it.
I mean, there are some difficult moments in the story, and there are these 6 days of my dad dying,
Yeah.
and reading those, as I got pretty emotional kind of reading those chapters, and it wasn't surprising to me because I mean, I would never have read those chapters publicly because I knew that they would be hard to read. So
Yeah.
I wasn't surprised that I found them emotional, but those were moments that I kind of had to take I remember saying to you, like, I'm going to need to take a moment here.
Yes,
Like, I'm just
yes,
going to need to sit with this for a minute
absolutely.
after having read it,
Yeah,
because it just felt very close.
yeah.
And again, because it was such an immersive experience, I felt like I was right back there,
Right.
you
Well,
know?
that is what reading our work aloud does, is it
Right.
does put us right back in that moment. And
Sure.
I mean, I certainly knew that you were going to need to take a moment, but I mean, even with that, I you were just so solid. I will keep repeating
Right.
that because you were so in sync with the words and with the telling of this story. Is there
Yeah.
was there something bigger than that beyond the publishing of it, that this was a different kind of vocalization of your
It was.
story?
It was, right? And I think that that was part of the feeling too. This story is all about kind of stepping out of the silence of my experience and learning to speak. And so I think that was also kind of a big part of why I wanted to have an audiobook and
Yeah,
I wanted to be the one reading it
yeah,
because I wanted to actually go through the act of speaking the story,
yeah, yeah.
So I would imagine, I mean, I don't know very much about like voice actors and narrators, but I would imagine when somebody is reading somebody else's work, they kind of have to manufacture the emotion that goes with particular passages and they
Mhm,
have to practice that. And I didn't feel like I had to do any kind of manufacturing of kind of the emotion behind the reading.
mhm.
It was very present,
Yeah,
through the whole thing.
yeah, definitely. And referring back to those 6 or 7 days that you were mentioning, the going into the time of your dad's dying,
Mhm.
I felt that too. I mean, it was almost like the air became thicker
Mm,
as
right.
because you would say, "Okay, we're getting close. We're I mean,
Right, like, I could do those little asides as we were reading, like, we
yeah,
would read a section and then, I'd kind of chat with Michelle and,
yeah,
say something, and I could tell, like, we're getting closer,
yeah, yeah.
So, yeah,
And to that end, I've had another question. This is more about the writing and the telling of your story
sure.
that I've been curious about because also I'm assuming that as you've been on book tour and doing readings everywhere that you don't read from those sections
I don't.
because yeah,
Right.
I
Yeah, I choose not to.
it would not
Yeah.
make sense.
Right. I did a talk in April, and it was a talk specifically connected to grief. And
Uh,
so I was kind of on a panel with two other writers, and we were talking about writing about grief. So I didn't read one of the dying chapters, but I think I read like the day after that
right.
chapter where we go shopping with my
Yeah.
mom.
Oh my
And so
god.
it's like a
Yeah.
day after my dad dies. And, so I read that chapter, and that's as close as I've come to kind of
Right.
reading those really difficult pages.
Right. And my sense in many of our other conversations and the
Mhm.
times we've spoken about your book is that the writing of those chapters was the absolute hardest writing you've done.
It was, and it was the last writing I did,
Yeah.
like, those chapters, I knew I had to write them from the time I started writing the book and knew what
Mhm.
the story was. I knew I would have to get to those, but I
Right.
waited, and I waited for a long time, and I talked to, my memoir students a lot about the fact that to be able to write some of this material, you have to come to a point where you're ready to do it, and I knew for a long time I was not ready to go into those pages because you have to go deep, and you have to be willing to stay there and
Right.
linger, and I knew, like, it took a long time for me to get to the point where I
Yeah.
could write those pages.
This is possibly seems like maybe the stupidest question anyone could ever ask. But did you have to write that scene? I mean, I can just sort of blithely say there could be a book without the dying scene.
Right.
But what was it about telling that?
I mean, I think for the sake of this story, had those pages not been in there, I think I mean, because so much of my experience was kind of waiting for
Right.
that. My dad was diagnosed with
Yeah.
HIV at a time when HIV was a certain death
Mhm.
sentence. So from the time he was diagnosed, we knew he was going to die. And then we have this 10-year period where we're waiting for that to happen. And,
Yeah.
the way I structure the book is that the reader, I mean, they know it's going to happen. I mean, it's not a mystery story.
Right,
They
right.
know
Yeah.
they know what the outcome is, but they're kind of waiting for that too. And I think it would have done a disservice to the reader and to myself had I not included those, because that was kind of what we were waiting for and what we knew we had to experience. And so I don't think they would have fully understood the experience without them.
Right. No, and I agree, but it was just something that has really stuck with me because
Mhm,
the pace of the whole book slows
mhm,
down. You have each chapter, or not every chapter, but many chapters, they're dated. We see early times, in the 80s, we see the 90s, and so chronologically you bounce around a little bit, but
right,
then the dates go from, a year to a specific day,
mhm,
December, and forgive me, it's escaping my brain at the moment, but Saturday, Sunday,
right,
Monday,
right.
and it really, really slows down. So it has the effect of us sitting with you at your
Exactly, and I mean,
dad's bed.
I don't mean to imply that if, you're writing about the death of someone, that everybody needs to include, full
No,
on,
exactly.
immersive death scenes, because I don't know that everybody could write them, but for me, those days are so pivotal in the experience, and they also are probably the most vivid memories. Like, I remember every second of
Yeah,
every single one of those 6 days. It'll always replay
yeah,
exactly as I wrote it.
right,
So, again, it just felt like, because that experience was so pivotal to the whole story, I
right,
felt like it had to be in there.
right, and that's exactly what I mean. I mean, I don't think any writer who is writing about death needs to have a death scene, and I
Right,
can see and I know of some who have intentionally not given the death
yes,
scene
right,
for whatever reason.
right,
So not aesthetically, emotionally, I
mhm,
was curious about that for you. And you mentioned another thing that I wanted to revisit with you, which is your memory, which is seems to be an extraordinary cinematic thing. Like, you remember a lot of details.
I do, I do. I mean, I jokingly say, my husband would say that's not always a great thing, that
Right,
because
right.
I can go back to, a fight we had, 17 years ago, and remember exactly what was said. But no, I do. I've always had that kind of memory. And
Right.
it's very visual. It's very visceral for me. Memories kind of stick with me in that way.
Yeah. I mean, and that so comes across because it is an extremely cinematic, scene rooted book. So I can see, for all those reasons combining, that those 6 or 7 days were just a thing that needed to be codified or put.
Well, and there was also something, as terrible as the dying was, there was also something truly beautiful in the dying as well. Because, I mean, we had the gift of my dad being able to die at home, because one
Yeah,
of my brothers is a doctor and he was able to,
yeah,
provide the care that was necessary. So we weren't in a hospital. We were in my parents' house, that overlooked the beautiful Halifax Harbor in Nova Scotia, and we were all there,
yeah,
so that it was also kind of solidifying the intimacy of that moment for our family as
yeah,
well,
yeah,
and so I think I also wanted to portray that experience as well, because it wasn't just about the dying, it was also
right.
about kind of what was happening for all of us in that experience. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And it was, I mean, it is the way I think many people would like to envision how
exactly.
they would be able to die, which is at home with your family around you. Yeah,
Right, and I
yeah,
reckon, and it was relatively peaceful. My dad at
right.
the end was not
Yeah,
in in great pain as far as we could tell. And,
Yeah.
so there wasn't this dramatic, painful experience for him at the end. And so I
Right.
think that was easier for me to portray as well, because that's what it was like. So,
Right. So maybe I'm just purely curious about the writing. So when you were able to get to the point of
mhm.
what did those days, were you in the MFA program when you were writing?
Mm,
Yeah.
I was, and it was kind of like the last chapter of my thesis that I had to turn in,
Wow. Talk
So it was
about
kind of like,
deadlines.
yeah, like
Yeah.
right at the deadline. And so it was kind of this is it. I have to do it at this stage. So it certainly, there was a lot of pressure on me at the moment, but it also, I was ready. I knew I had gotten to the point where I was ready. So,
Were you not at home on those days? Were you physically in a different place?
actually, ironically, I was on family vacation, with my
Oh,
extended family,
really?
but wasn't really talking about the fact that I was doing that writing kind of in our downtimes when we weren't, with the kids
Wow.
at the beach and stuff. And so, but in some ways that was good, because it enabled me to step away
I
from
was
it,
gonna
step
say,
out of
yeah.
it, and kind of put myself in a different mindset and put on a different persona, so it wasn't like I was just sitting in a cabin all by myself dealing with it. So I think that was good in a lot of ways,
Yes,
because it gave me some respite from it too.
definitely.
And I tell my students about that as well, that, when you're writing kind of those most difficult of things, I think you need to build in some respite for yourself, build in some moments of relief from that. I mean,
Yeah.
and I don't want to claim to know anybody else's process, but for me, I think if I had tried to write those days over like immersive 3 or 4 days of writing, I think that would have been too hard.
Right, right. No, that makes sense. I
Yeah.
I just love hearing people's different processes for
Yeah.
how they do,
Right.
because I do think that when trying to get at difficult material, I find myself getting up and pacing around the house, or,
Right.
like, "Oh, is it time to
Yeah.
change the laundry?" Or, like
Well, and I also think, by the time I was writing them, like if I had tried to write this book chronologically, which I didn't, I realized very early on that I couldn't, and I didn't structure it chronologically either. I mean, I think those dying pages happen about, 2/3 of the way through the book, something,
Yeah,
something like that. And by the time I was writing those chapters, I knew where the book was going to be headed and ending, so I kind of knew, like, this isn't
right,
the ending point. I know what comes after. I know what
right.
I've come to understand about what came after. So
Yeah,
I think that made the writing of them a little bit easier to tolerate.
yeah, yeah. Well,
Mhm.
it is definitely, the most moving writing of a death scene I feel like I've read. I mean, it's
Thank
beautiful. It's
you.
and I if that doesn't I don't I hope it doesn't sound funny, but, it's
No,
the
I mean,
most intimate and final thing that we all will do, and so I am always really curious to read.
well, and my publisher actually nominated, the actual dying scene for a pushcart prize. So I feel like it's gotten some of that
Yes.
recognition, which I'm pleased about.
Yeah.
I wanted to do it justice, so I feel like I
Yeah.
did. But I also, I give you a lot of
Oh.
credit as the person who had to listen to these chapters again and again and again. I don't think people understand what goes into kind of the from your end of it,
Right.
like how closely that you have to listen. So you also had to kind of really immerse yourself in this
Yeah.
story long after I read
Right,
it,
right. I did, yeah, I mean, this is true. I go back and listen many times, and it's funny because then I find myself getting into that same flow, and, we go, "Okay, here we go." I would be working on perhaps a chapter and say, "Okay, let's see how far I can take this. Where is a good stopping point?" Sometimes logistically does not always work out as well emotionally with where that is, so I might end up leaving it at some very emotional moment, which again, I think to your point is like, "Okay, let's take a little break, then we'll go back and we'll see where it was," and sometimes I'd have to go back and, like, sort of get myself into it, listen from a little further back. But yeah, it is many listens.
Mm-hmm.
And so it does, I will say from my perspective, it has to be a book that I can spend a lot of time with. And
I was
yeah,
going to say, I mean, it has to be, and it was clear that you were willing to do that and you believed in it enough that you wanted to do that. But I can imagine that if it wasn't a book you felt deeply committed to, it would be very hard to do that work.
indeed. Yeah. I
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I'm not sure I could really. I mean, I feel
Right.
fortunate enough that it's something I feel fortunate that I can pick projects at the moment. So,
Right.
yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Um
Yeah.
I was also going to ask, going back to the preparation, the micro preparation. It appeared to me, again, you just seemed like ready. You were like, here we go. You went
Yeah.
into the closet, you went into the studio, and
Yep.
you did it. Like, you had your
Right.
tea. Tea was a logistical
Hmm.
thing, and, you had your quiet clothing, as I will always refer to how
Right.
Charlotte Maya
Yep.
says it. Um, but were there other preparations you made on a small
Well,
level?
I think the one thing, like, kind of the unexpected was that you remember that first day, like, I started losing my voice
Oh,
after about 4 or 5 4
yeah.
hours maybe, and I think that that was
Oh,
unexpected, like, I didn't anticipate that, kind of my voice would give out quite that
that's
quickly,
funny.
and so I recognized kind of after that, and I know we had to go back and, like, re-record
Yeah,
something that voice was so different, you know? And I think I recognized after just like how I needed to treat my voice as I was recording. It's interesting, I have in the past been a vocalist, and so I have a little bit of voice training, but I have classically trained musicians for in-laws, and my
right.
mother-in-law was an opera
Yeah,
singer, and I mean she's all about taking care of your voice and the ways you take care of your voice. And so I just kind of had her voice in my head, like, don't be straining,
yeah.
at that mid level of your
Oh,
voice.
yeah.
And, just kind of different things I started to recognize in terms of taking care of myself as I was reading it.
Right, right. That's interesting. I know you had told me that about her, but I did
Mhm.
not know she was in your ear with these
A
things.
little bit,
Was
yeah.
there anything in particular she, like, recommended or something? Because I would
Well,
love
I
to
think
know.
that she's always about the breath, right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
let your breath kind of control the sound of your voice, to kind of
Mhm.
don't push from your chest, like kind of
Right.
those kinds of things. And
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I realized, like, I needed to be more intentional about my breathing. I needed to
Yes.
be more intentional about those things that I wouldn't normally be thinking about when I was reading a
Yeah,
passage,
yeah.
but when I knew I was going to be reading for the next 4 hours, I needed to think that through a little bit
Right.
more.
And I will say, it's kind of funny that you say you were surprised that after 4 hours I mean, I was shocked that it didn't give out before that. I mean,
Yeah,
that's in my experience, I feel like that's a really long time. I mean,
right,
I
right,
know my voice gets very tired after, like, an hour maybe.
right.
So, do you remember? I was thinking about how I wanted to make sure, like, the environment here was as supportive and physically ready for you as it could be. And I had this, and it's the middle of winter, well, or early winter, and I had that humidifier going.
Yes, yeah, yep, I know. I mean, you were thinking through all the possibilities. I mean, you took good care of me,
I
Michelle.
j- I try, and then at one point I remember looking across the room and I was like, "Is it foggy in here?" Like, it had been
What
going so
setting is
much.
that,
I
right? Yeah,
know. I was like,
yeah,
I think we have enough moisture
yeah,
in the air.
yeah, exactly.
Oh, here's another one that's not entirely dissimilar from what we've been talking about, but I don't know if you think about being in your body in other
Mhm,
ways when you are writing as
mhm.
well as when you were recording, because that's been kind of a new consideration for me, but
When I felt most attuned to that was actually when I was listening to the tracks after we had
ah,
recorded. Like, I don't feel like I was so conscious of it when I was doing the recording,
mhm,
but I had to be, like, very different in terms of listening to my, when, like, the way Michelle did it, she would work on editing a section and then she would upload it. We had this Google Drive where she would upload it and I would listen to it. And I found a different kind of being in tune. And it wasn't the same as kind of being in tune with rereading my writing. It was a different process.
Hmm.
So I felt something different in that, and I often would listen to it as I was walking the dog,
Right,
and so
right.
again, it was very immersive,
Hmm.
but it also was like I was attuning to very different things, like I was listening to the sound of my voice. I was listening to the way I was pronouncing things. I was listening to, is the pacing right,
Yeah, yeah,
So,
exactly. And that is the thing. I think it's funny until you are working in this kind of a sphere that you don't think about all those different ways to listen or what you're
right,
listening for. Cause I would send you little notes like, okay, don't worry about any breaths or any
right,
pacing.
right.
Does the
Yeah,
way that you read it make
yeah,
sense here?
yeah.
So
But even things like I remember saying, I think in a couple of chapters, I pronounced my mom's name
right,
mom versus mom. And I was like,
right.
we got to get that
Yeah, those
consistent, like those
consistency
kinds of
things.
things that you want to say
Yeah,
properly, you know?
exactly. Is it 2019 or
Right, right.
2019?
Yep,
Yeah,
yep,
those
exactly.
things are
Yep.
all you gotta
And
just
it's those things that you don't really think about until you're in the middle of doing it. And then,
exactly.
that's why it's good to have somebody like you listening
Have
to
a
it and
second set
getting
of
getting
ears.
credit. Yep,
Always, always. It's the same with writing,
right,
everyone needs an editor, everyone needs a
exactly.
second set of
Yeah,
ears. Well, I had pulled some clips to listen to if we
sure.
wanted to do that.
Love that.
I picked some things that are just good examples of why, professional voiceover people are fantastic and worth their weight in gold because it is acting.
Right.
But I also agree with you that when you're listening to a memoir, if it's possible to hear the person who wrote it actually read it, you're going to
Mhm.
have it will come across the way that it
Right.
happened
Right.
when it was either written or lived. So I'm only going to go kind of chronologically within the book. So the
Okay.
first one is the very beginning of the chapter that is entitled He Was My Favorite.
And I do remember that this is one of the ones we re-recorded
Oh,
because
is it? That was
yeah, I remember the next day I was like, I want to do the beginning of that chapter again because I love this chapter so much that I was like, I want that to sound right,
Yeah, yeah. And there was one I remember you were saying, "Oh, it's I have written in my book gravelly." And
gravelly.
yeah, and so we redid it. And it's funny cuz the gravelly, it's sort of like a sliding slope of like where does it really begin? So like
Yeah.
finding the moment to
Right.
cut it
Right.
is also even that in itself is a
Yeah.
yet another thing to figure out. But okay, so I don't think we need too much of a setup for
Okay.
this. It's pretty straightforward.
He was my favorite. When I sit down to write a simple description of my dad, I get stuck. The words I scatter into my sentences in my efforts to give him definition: brilliant, wise, confident, funny, loving, hardworking, compassionate, generous, proud, respected, guarded, complicated, feel stiff and distancing. In my mind, my dad lives as a medley of images and captured moments that order and reorder themselves to shape, as best they can, some of the contours of the man he was. In no particular order, here are some highlights. Dad didn't like his coffee too hot. No matter where we were, he'd scoop an ice cube from his water glass and stir it into his steaming cup until it dissolved in the dark liquid before taking his first sip. He could tie a fly onto a fishing line with one hand. He'd take naps on the family room couch with his glasses still propped on his face. He had a secret nickname for almost everyone: comical, often unflattering, and bordering on offensive, and inevitably spot on, that would end up sticking for good. When Mark brought his first girlfriend home from college, Dad christened her the Pickle because that's where she ranked on his scale of sweetness.
Love, love, love.
Yeah.
So good. And not only is it just a chapter completely filled with love, but we had some very long, complicated sentences. We had a list, we had an emotional transition. So I just felt like all of that was mwah, beautifully done.
Well, I remember redoing that line about like the listing of the things I would try to write, and I
Yeah.
remember you saying like, "No, let's try it again. Let's try it again." And you would give me kind of a way to say it, like slow it down, make those a little more clipped, like those.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
How
really
can
helpful.
we exemplify each word?
Right.
It's just a bizarre and mystical process, the
Mhm.
human voice. And the sound of what you have to say about your dad transmits to us in the telling of that tale.
Yeah.
So that was just beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay, and we have another one next. Oh yeah. Okay. So this is another one of my favorite scenes of little Melanie with your dad coming home from work. For people who might not know, your dad was a physician, he was a
As a
surgeon,
surgeon.
and you have 3 brothers,
Right.
so
I talk about it as among the earliest memories of my dad, and it's this moment of trying to understand, his ability to compartmentalize.
exactly, yes,
Yeah.
so this is the transition moment. Here we go.
Hi, Daddy, I say, peeking my face through the staircase's metal railing. His eyes turn upward and a smile lights his face, erasing the tired lines. Hi, Melanie Joybells, he says, and releases his grip on the briefcase, pushing it into the corner by the door. I abandon my Barbies in a jumbled heap and dash down the stairs into his outstretched arms, feeling the wet from the rain on my cheeks. How was your day? He asks, kicking off his dress shoes and unbuttoning his overcoat. I launch into an account of how Madame Arsenault, my first grade teacher, read us a story that day, totally in French, and I'd understood almost every word. It was about this brother and sister named Rémi and Aline, and they were going to their first birthday party, I tell him as we walk toward the kitchen, my arm still stretched around his waist. I often replay this memory and that pause in the scene when my father stood still, looking nowhere, before setting down his briefcase. What I understand now is that a shift was taking place, a moment of transition. On the other side of our front door, my father was Dr. Messenger. On this side of the door, though, he was Dad. To be Dad, he had to put down the events of his day. Put down his briefcase full of charts detailing prognoses and treatment plans and surgical outcomes, and leave it, and the unrelenting stress that accompanied that work, in the entryway. He couldn't carry its weight with him into the world of our family.
So, yeah, really lovely moment captured of this transition from Dr. Messenger to Dad. And I will say the thing about that little clip that I love the most is I love the excitement in your voice when you talk about learning French, and it's about Remy and Aline. I just loved hearing you read the French there. It was so
Yeah.
fun. I was like, "Oh, wow, listen to her." She
A little of my background comes out.
Exactly, and so to hear that again,
Yeah.
like, I wanna hear Melanie Joybell's
Right, right.
excitement of, speaking French, understanding French. So,
Yeah, yeah.
okay, next, another character in this is your brother David in the chapter that is called "The Official Story."
Mm,
Your parents were working on their book, which was
mhm,
their version of the story of what was happening to your dad.
mm.
So there was a big problem that happened
Yeah, kind of a
in
catastrophic one. Yeah.
catastrophic problem in the writing of the book. And so with that, we will hear.
I'd clicked on the document and prayed silently as the file loaded. Please be there. Please be there. As with so many others, my prayer went unanswered. A blank page opened on the screen. I scrolled to the bottom to find nothing but more blankness. Did you maybe save it under a different name? I asked, opening other documents, Dave's homework assignments, my lesson plans for student teaching. I already knew the answer. As I searched, I replayed what I guessed had happened. Dad had opened the file, worked on it, and went to close the document, but hit a mistaken key. An unusual message opened, asking if he wanted to proceed with the action. Assuming he was saving his document, he clicked yes. He erased the whole thing and left behind an empty file. My eyes traced the vertical pattern of the wood paneling on the walls. I couldn't bring myself to turn around and look into Dad's expectant face. I didn't know what to do. I think you might have lost, I began, but my admission was cut short by the sound of a slamming door, footsteps overhead, and a bellowed, "Hello!" from the top of the stairs. David was home from school. "Down here, Dave," Dad shouted. "We need you." His voice remained cheerful. He didn't know what he'd done yet. He trusted David to swoop in and figure things out. But after scrolling and typing and searching for close to an hour, David had not figured things out. The book was gone. Dave swiveled the desk chair toward me, and our eyes met, the question wedged between us. Who was going to tell him?
To find out,
Keep reading.
keep reading. Go download Melanie's book.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. I have one more.
Okay.
I wanted to dip close to before we get to the death scene
Sure.
where we're going into
Getting
the
there.
zone.
Yeah.
Getting there, exactly. So this is a scene where you are with your dad. You're helping him do some Christmas shopping through the L.L. Bean catalog.
Right.
And you had helped him with picking out some gifts for your mom. And that takes a toll on him. And this is what comes next.
Should we take a break? I asked when he put his head back and shut his eyes. He didn't say anything, and I started to close the catalog. Then he began to wiggle his toes. His eyes opened, and he propped himself up on his elbows so he could see his feet. "Find these socks," he said, continuing with the toe action. "They are warm and don't itch. These are really cozy socks." I took a closer look at the blue cotton socks covering his squirming feet, and then looked back through the catalog. I found them. 100% cotton rag socks, $9.95. "Who are they for?" I asked. "Get some in every color," he said. "There are like 10 different colors, Dad." I pointed to the product description. "Perfect. Order them all." "All of them? Who are they for?" I asked again. "Everybody," he said simply, and then added, "I think you all could use some warm and really cozy socks this Christmas." Tears assembled just above my lower lashes. I didn't speak. If I did, I would cry, and if I started crying, I might never stop.
It's hard for us to listen to that because we know what comes next. Right? Yeah.
Exactly. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did a beautiful job. I did have one other question that's kind of about fortitude.
Sure.
It sort of struck me as I was thinking about your reading this book and your whole experience, starting with a heart attack that your dad had, then had the transfusion where he became HIV positive, and then at least a decade of silence.
Mm-hmm.
That 10 years was a really pivotal time span for you between being 13 and 23.
Mm-hmm.
And do you feel that you learned some kind of strength or fortitude in the keeping of the silence that has been able to be flipped in your favor when you decided to lift the veil on the silence?
Oh, I think so. I mean, I think anybody who goes through, a long-term experience of pain or suffering or trauma, I mean, I think something in us become like a resilience builds, I think, in most cases. I certainly feel like there was a resilience that was built in that because as much as we were anticipating Dad's death, we also had to live life for 10 years, and so you kind of have to learn to keep going in the midst of what's happening. And so I think in many ways that has stuck with me, kind of that ability to kind of keep moving through. And as this has transitioned and I've, now it's something I talk about, now it's not something shrouded in silence. I think I've also had to kind of hold on to that resilience because, that experience in itself is requires its own kind of resilience, and so I think I did learn that, in the
Yeah.
process. And the other thing I was just thinking about when you were talking, I was thinking, I also think in some ways it was helpful not to record the book until after it had
Oh,
been out for a little bit because I had kind of gotten used to telling the story. I'd gotten used
right.
to speaking to people about it. And, before the
Yeah.
book came out, that was not something I did regularly.
That's
So I
interesting.
think that that helped in the process as well of, I was ready. I had been talking about it. I had discovered that talking about it had actually been really good for me, so
Mhm.
I think that also kind of built a certain fortitude for doing the recording of it.
Yeah, I guess that's a little bit of maybe what I was imagining. And
Mhm.
did recording it do an additional new thing?
I just think it gave me another perspective on it,
Yeah,
again, like
yeah.
in some ways, you're listening to yourself read this story, and it's me in the here and now reading a story I wrote that I really finished 5 years ago, and then also that I've read. And so it's kind of this weird,
Right.
like, these various versions of myself, at
Exactly.
various points. But I mean, I think there's something, you learn something in that process too. You learn something about yourself. And I think the fact that as I listened to these tracks and I listened to myself read it again, you have a different perspective, a different understanding that continues. And I think that's something beautiful about personal stories is that they don't kind of stop in time. They continue
Exactly.
moving. They're kind of organic. There's movement in them, even
Mhm.
beyond what we've written. And I felt that kind of in the
Yeah.
recording and in the listening to the recordings as well.
I love hearing that because I do think it's interesting and possibly important. I mean, maybe this wouldn't be the case with every author and every book, but to your point of the book came out in September of 23, we recorded this in December.
Yep.
I worked on it until a month
Recently.
ago. So now it has come out within a year, so I'm very, very happy that I was able to get that done for you
Yeah.
in that hopeful time frame. Yeah, it's just continual spirals of yourself that come out again and again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's very true to the experience of living something like this, right?
Yes,
Like it
yes.
doesn't go away. It's something, it's a story that still lives in me, that still shapes so much of my world. And, and it continues to move inside me. And so, I mean, it feels very reflective of that. And different iterations of it come out in different ways.
Yeah. And here's another, I hope this doesn't sound funny or weird, but I think for such a very devastating, traumatic, difficult experience that you went through after writing it and publishing it and then going out on book tour and reading it, I will say you were less emotional, like you needed to take less time
Yeah.
through even the hardest parts than I potentially envisioned that you would need
Right.
to. So, not that we ever heal. I kind of
Yeah.
don't like that word. We change, but you have really
I don't
transformed.
mind using the word healing because
Yeah.
I don't think I refer to healing in the "it's all better" sense,
Right. Yep.
right? But there is healing in the way that it's not the same burden it was before I started any of this, right?
Right.
There's healing in that. There's healing in having the opportunity to share this story and have other people attend to it and listen to it and
Yeah.
be interested in that.
Yeah.
It's validation, so that is healing. It's not healing the story itself, right? That's
Right.
always going to be what it was, but I change and transition through this process.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. Oh, well, thank you so much. Is there anything else you have to say or that you had thoughts about it or
Well, I just can't sing your praises, Michelle, anymore than I already have, but I will.
thank you.
I couldn't have asked for a better experience, and I mean, I don't have anything to compare it to, but I imagine it to be the best of the experience that it could have been, and I give you a lot of credit for that. And again, just I would say to anybody who's listening and wondering about, how do you find somebody? I think it comes down to that level of trust. I think it comes down to finding somebody who really cares about your story. And, I would highly recommend Michelle and her work to
Oh,
do this. So,
thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so
yeah,
much. It was, yeah, it was, I call it an audio partnership, and it was an ideal,
right.
wonderful, ideal partnership. So, A Hard Silence, now available on audiobook. That feels so good to say,
It does. It
you
does.
know? All right. Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you, Michelle.
Well, that is a wrap for this episode. Go download A Hard Silence right now. Just a tap away pretty much anywhere you can get an audiobook for purchase. Audible, Libro FM, Apple Books, and the audiobook of A Hard Silence is available for a special sale price at each retailer when you purchase before July 2nd, so do not miss out on that. I'll include a link for Audible in the show notes as well as for Libro FM. And if you have not heard of Libro FM, you should know that like Audible, they have a monthly membership rate, or you can buy audiobooks a la carte. But what they do is support local bookstores with every purchase, and you can even select your favorite indie bookstore to support when you join, so you may be interested in checking them out as well. I will also include a link for Audiophile magazine in the show notes, and of course a link for Melanie's website. Well, you have made it to the end of another Daring to Tell, and if you haven't signed up for my monthly newsletter, The Redo, I hope you'll do that at my website, michellerado.com. What is the incentive? Well, just a chance for a little more mulling over the conversations I have on Daring to Tell. A big thank you to my husband, Phil Rado, for our theme music, Make Me Brave. And brave for me, this month we'll be figuring out what I actually have for you in July. I am not entirely sure at the moment, and yes, I know it is late June, but I am working on a couple of ideas. Most of all, a huge thanks to you for daring to listen. I will catch you next time.
And nothing's gonna break my fall. There's nothing in the protocol. It's like swimming up waterfall or taking away the ground. Taking away the ground. It's like taking away the ground.